Walsh in Hiroshima, and today we have Hiko Simon.
In Tokyo.
Hiko Simon in Tokyo.
Hey, nice to be back.
It's been a long time. How's the weather in Tokyo?
The weather in Tokyo today, it's getting a little bit chilly, actually, at the moment. It's sort of coming down. It's actually snowing not that far north of Tokyo at the moment. So we're having a bit of a cold snap, but it was still nice today. So, yeah.
Absolutely beautiful day today in Hiroshima, but morning and now going into evening, it's cold again. So I've got my sweater on. I'm like two wardrobes out at the same time right now. Like
that time of year.
Warm, right?
Well, I still prefer this time of year to stinking hot all the time and freezing cold all the time that we have. This is a narrow window of actually pleasant during the day weather, so I do enjoy it. It doesn't last for very long.
I am with you 100%.
Yeah.
A spring and autumn girl. I'm not too keen on winter, not too keen on summer, a little bit too cold, too hot for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, great. Let's start. So for anybody who doesn't know, we usually talk about recent news in Japan. And of course, because my focus is always on sustainability, we talk about the connections with people, planet, and profits and how to find a balance, which is always hard.
Yeah.
Hiko, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit? Because I think using HAPS, this is the first time we've done it together.
Good point. And yes, I am completely overwhelmed with all the technology right now. But I understand this is possibly going out on all the socials. And if so, hello, all the socials. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Hiko Simon. I run a YouTube channel where I just do basically every week. I sit down and I look at the news from the week that I find the most interesting, and I just talk about it. And it's quite a good bunch of people that follow it. And it's fun to talk about. And among the things I generally talk about things with a Japan focus, but I'm always interested in space and technology and environmental stuff. And from that perspective, we have a connecting point, and it's really fun for me to do a show just focusing on sustainability topics. It's a really big challenge in the world right now, isn't it? It's such an urgent thing to do, and it's newsworthy stuff, and it's really exciting and interesting to discuss what's going on, particularly in Japan. So that's the angle I like to take on it, and I love getting together with you about once a month and talking about it.
Yeah, it's so fun because you come from a very different background. You've got a very different insights. You're in the big city. I'm in a medium-sized city, so it's always a good discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure. And I enjoy the, I very much respect people who are more dedicated. I've worked around sustainability, like professionally, and, and I've always had an interest in it, but I wouldn't say I'm as committed wholeheartedly. I'm not vegetarian. I'm not, I'm not a perfectly living green sort of a person. So I respect a lot of people who are. But I find the problems of it really, really interesting, and the solutions and so on, and figuring out, so that's what I really enjoy discussing with you and people with, similar interests, but different viewpoints. I think that's the best way to figure out problems.
And I think that is such an important point, that you feel like you're a normal person living a normal life, but you're trying to find better solutions, like better options. I mean, to be honest, I'm really embracing that. Like I used to be much more black and white. No, you got to be vegan. No, everybody's got to stop using plastic 100%. But it's just impossible, especially in Japan. So if I can inspire someone out there to make a better choice than they were making before, if it's available, that's a score. That's a win right there.
Yeah. I saw on your Twitter the other day the bananas and the plastic wrappers, which I agree are ridiculous, but you're still finding good use for them, and yes.
So
I know the struggle. It's a daily struggle.
It's wrapped in plastic, which I hate, but I'm reducing food waste, and I think food waste might be a bigger problem. So, for every one of these issues, I'm always thinking, which is worse, which is better, try to make a better choice, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Well, I want to drop you right in there. I really love this news story that you talked about in your amazing talk show that I can't believe you do almost every Sunday. Tokyo Tonight. You've been doing it for 10 years, right?
Is it that long? It probably. I have nothing better to do. So yes, it's my hobby. I just go on, I talk, and I log off. But it's nothing special. But I do enjoy
Oh,
it. So yeah,
it's so fun. And I don't know. I mean, I love this banter back and forth with guests. I think doing it
yeah.
solo is so much harder.
Mm.
We've got Luis Poppy popping in. Thanks, Luis. Great to see you here. And we've got the Red Value from
Oh yeah,
YouTube. Thanks for joining. Can you
yeah.
see this?
I cannot.
You can't.
You know what? Maybe I can. Comments. There's a
Yeah, choose
comments
the
thing.
comments because you should be able to see it.
I can see
And
it.
Paragotti, hey, Hiko
Paragotti. Yep.
Simon and JJ, thanks for joining.
Yep. Regular viewer. Good to have your Paragotti
That's
and the red
awesome.
velvet.
Or we should use your style, right, Hiko? We should say boom.
Boom. Eco-friendly boom. But yes.
Yeah. All
No,
right.
no, no, no carbons used.
So I chose one of the articles that you talked about in Tokyo
Okay.
Tonight, which
Yeah.
is probably, to me, one of the strangest pieces of news
And what
from
was that?
Japan about Japan trying to overreach even while people are outside of Japan about marijuana.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like chasing people. Well, basically threatening mainly Japanese citizens, but also residents of Japan, like you and I, overseas, reminding them that the Japanese criminal code on marijuana cannabis use is not territorially restricted. Technically, you can be charged and convicted of using or possessing marijuana even outside of Japan. They'll come for you, and they're actually, when it was just legalized in New Jersey and New York City. In fact, I think New York State. And the same thing happened when they did it in Colorado and Washington. Was the local consulates sent emails to all the local Japanese residents saying, before you go out to those prohibition parties, remember, that you're still subject to Japanese law and you can be convicted when you return to Japan, just to scare everybody. And I asked the question. I mean, there's a few layers, obviously. There's a context we could go more into in this show about, how it should be regulated in the first place. But from my perspective, it's also the thing. I mean, do they send threatening emails to people in Macau who are gambling? Do they send threatening, the different countries have different things that are legal and not legal, including drinking age, including things like gambling, including, different sorts of vice. And, this is the only case I know where the government actually proactively chases after and threatens its own citizens, taking advantage of different laws in other countries.
Yeah.
So it seems
It's
ridiculous.
crazy. But one of the things you were talking about, which really struck a chord with me, which I've talked to organic farmers in Japan about too, is how hemp has a long history in Japan.
Sacred. I mean, for a start, sacred in Shinto, and the emperor himself was the patron of the industry at the end of World War II. I mean, the whole World War II thing, all those warplanes and uniforms, they were all made out of hemp. It was actually, Japan didn't use synthetic, didn't use rayon or nylon or anything like that. They didn't have petroleum-based fibers or anything like that. It was all done from. It grows. It's a natural plant in Japan. It grows by the highways up in Hokkaido, and it's not, right, again, from what I understand nowadays, there's super powerful stuff. It's being bred to be super powerful for people who want to use it, to get high. But in Japan, it's hemp. It's not particularly strong stuff. It's all over the place. But
It's a
it's,
great source material
yeah,
for
yeah,
fabric, for ropes. And I was surprised that it had a history in Japan.
big
Um,
history in Japan.
yeah,
Yeah. In
interesting.
sumo wrestling, those ropes that they use, the massive ropes that the wrestlers use in the Shinto ceremonies, that's all hemp. It's actually integral, and it's wonderful. It grows fast. It's great productive stuff. So it was actually all the demonization that's happened, and it's funny how far they've taken it. They've adopted imposed morality, and they've taken it beyond the morality of the country that imposed it. This was the Americans, GHQ, that imposed it on Japan in order to force Japan to buy American synthetic fibers. By basically demonizing it and outlawing it. And 50 years later, America's legalizing it, and Japan is treating it like it's worse than crack cocaine.
What
With
is
all the
your take
hysteria.
on that? Because usually, in my experience, you see America do something, and about 5 or 10 years later, you see Japan adopt the same thing. So now that America is making marijuana legal, are we going to see big changes in Japan? Because it actually is good for the economy if you start using it as a medical marijuana, at least, right?
which even that is, of course, I mean, in Japan as
Illegal in
well, the
Japan, yeah.
hysteria, I mean, and not just, I mean, there's also with Adderall, for example, like ADHD drugs are considered crystal meth in Japan, and people have gotten in trouble bringing that into Japan. So I think the hysteria, Japan just has a different thing about the policy around drugs, and it's almost religious. It's not a health-based policy. You know, they don't claim, when they say it's dangerous, they're not really thinking about medical danger. They'll say medical danger, but it's really about that you're breaking a serious rule. You know, it's really just boiled on that line, and that's the way it's seen across the board. So the problem right now, I think, is that the stigma. I mean, when you have a celebrity in America, if you found out that a celebrity, a news anchor, or someone in a TV drama possessed 2 grams of marijuana for personal use, you know, that would not be a particularly scandalous news story, right? Even in a state where it was illegal, it would be like a speeding ticket, I think, in terms of social treatment. In Japan, you know, you have to stop your career. You have to have an apology press conference. The music companies will throw out your music, tainted that it was in any way enhanced by recreational drug use or anything like that. Like, you know, and then multiple, it still happens. So I think washing away the
I have
stigma
a
is not
really
easy for that.
funny story from that, funny memory. I don't know if you were probably in Japan at this time too. And in the same year, there were 2 cases of marijuana in the news in Japan. One was, I think it was Paul McCartney
Mm.
tried to
Oh
bring
yeah.
marijuana in, right? And
Yep.
the other was, did you ever watch Zatoichi, the blind swordsman? I used to watch it as a kid in Hawaii, and
Right.
that actor who was not actually blind, and that was a surprise to me, which is a different story. He was arrested trying to take marijuana from Japan into Hawaii.
I haven't heard of the second one. I heard of the first one's famous, and there are so many Japanese who are embarrassed that Japan is the country that arrested Paul McCartney. But the second one I didn't know, and taking it from Japan, I mean, that's exporting. Wow.
Into Hawaii, of all
Yeah.
places, you know you can get
The
it
last place you
there,
need it.
right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. And then it was also, it's not only about government policy trying to control what people do outside the country, which I thought was really strange, but
Yeah.
it's also the whole idea that hemp was a heritage product in Japan, which I didn't know. So I really enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
No, fascinating. It's worth reading up on. There are, you know, I didn't have the links when I did the show, but there are great stories about how the emperor toured the country. This is during the occupation period. This happened under GHQ when Japan was under direct rule by America. That this was that the regulations against hemp were imposed. The emperor toured the country around hemp growers, assuring them that he would personally make sure that all the hemp growers in Japan wouldn't be ruined by this and that they'd be taken care of. And obviously they kind of were. I mean, there are hemp is produced in Japan. You can buy hemp beers and hemp products, and there are licensed farms and whatever in
There's
Niigata
a
and
lot of
places like
the
that.
oils in the health food stores here. You'll see the
Yeah,
oils. What
domestically
is it?
produced.
CBG oil or something? And
Yeah.
you'll see that here. So that must be allowed, right?
So probably these are the old the last remnants of the old farmers who were wiped out. I mean, it's funny as well how you talk about how fanatically Japan holds on to you know, the tradition of things like whaling and so on, and you know, even when the whole world's sort of against it, and yet, you know, with hemp, which is actually religiously sacred and naturally growing wild all over the place here, and yet they actually did allow that industry to sort of get wiped out, even when it was under the protection of the emperor. So yeah, it's fascinating, but I think what's really interesting is how hardened the social attitudes are against it, and it's not based on a rational, it's not based on a, you know, is it worse than cigarettes or alcohol or anything like that, which is how everyone talks about it in New Zealand and America. It's based on, oh, if you take that, you're a criminal, you know, and it's so hard to undo that. I don't know if Japan can undo that, but yeah.
But then again, this is a rule following country. So if they do
Yep.
decide to change the rule, everybody will accept it a lot easier.
Yeah.
It'll be a very smooth transition, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is the thing. I've never seen it go the other way. Like when I came to Japan in Shibuya, like there was a thing that magic mushrooms were not explicitly regulated, and so but they were, through lack of regulation, legal in Japan. And in Shibuya, there were magic mushroom shops, and it was actually Japan was getting called out by America that, hey, you guys are out of line. You know, you should be regulating like us. And Japan finally did, but it was only like 10 years ago. I would love to see if Japan couldn't go back the other way, but the reason it's going the other way in America is because it's a logical policy, weighing risk and benefits decision. And Japan doesn't really operate like that, so I would love to see it, but I'm skeptical that it should happen, but I'm skeptical. We'll see.
Of course, I think we have to talk about COVID.
Yes.
How's the vaccine rollout and testing is kind of normalized now since we last talked. But vaccine rollout, I think, is the big issue that everybody's trying to figure out. There's not much information, right?
Well, I subscribe to all the information that's out there on it, and I share it as I get it. So, the government is sharing how many shots are being given every day. They do regular press conferences on how much of the stuff they've shipped in. I kind of get it. People from the UK and America, where everyone back home is already getting vaccinated wonderfully at great rates, and I think that's wonderful. And they're saying, why can't Japan be vaccinating as fast as America? I kind of like. My perspective on that is I get the complaining, and are we there yet? And let's hurry up and put pressure so we get it as soon as possible. That's fair enough. And keeping the government accountable for that, that's fair enough as well. But we can't get, Japan can't give it when it doesn't have it. The vaccines come from America and UK and Europe, and they're going to give it to themselves
They
first.
don't have their own.
Yeah.
Even countries like Canada or countries in Europe that aren't manufacturing their own are behind the curve, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, Japan is particularly behind, but yeah.
That I'm really surprised about is the deaths are so low in Japan. Like the numbers on this data right here, it's almost 500,000 people have been tested positive.
Well, there was a weird thing last year.
It's really low, right?
And everyone was saying, "Oh, they're just not testing enough and not finding enough of the cases," or there are other people saying, "Oh, there must be deaths and they're just not labeling them as COVID deaths." That can't be right. It can't be right that Japan can be doing better than Europe and and North America. But then when they looked at the total death data last year, you remember there was a time when Japan actually had less than average death because during the flu season, nobody got flu because everyone was hiding at home. So actually, there were actually fewer than normal deaths. It was actually, when everyone went there to go find the hiding, the smoking gun of Japan hiding the data. So it seems, and now they've taken all these surveys of the population to see, okay, how many people have antibodies indicating that they might have had it in the last few months. And when Tokyo is 1% and everywhere else in Japan is still a 0 point something percent, i.e. it just hasn't ripped through the society, so far. But of course, what terrifies me, what I'm becoming increasingly focused on, is 104 days to the Olympics now. And while cases are starting to spike up again in Tokyo, and I don't know if anyone's factoring in the idea of having an unvaccinated Tokyo, because we're still not going to be vaccinated, and inviting 200,000 people into the city for a super spreader event, and what that's going to do. We've had after all this time of being so good and everybody staying home and wearing masks and socially distancing, I hope it doesn't get ruined by that. So that is concerning.
Well, I was glad to hear that they postponed the Go-To campaign again.
Although
right
when
the spikes are happening.
3 days ago, the patron of the Go-To campaign.
Baye McNeil just joined. Thanks for joining, Baye.
Yeah.
And Mike Craddock, thank you for your comments. Been really good comments. The cost to incarcerate people in Japan who get caught with possession is very high. I can't believe the public doesn't care more about legalizing it. Yeah, good point.
They don't care about legalizing it because it's very similar to tattoos in Japan. It's not about whether it's good for you or bad for you. It's that it's seen as a sign, a stigmatic badge that you're a criminal. If you have marijuana, you must have bought it from some gangsters, and so you must associate with gangsters. And it's the same thing with tattoos, and that's why they have bans on it. So there's a social thing.
It's very similar to tattoos and how the use of marijuana. I actually have met people in Japan, young Japanese people who have been in jail in Japan because they got caught with marijuana and they had to stop their businesses. They are also often people with really cool tattoos, not yakuza tattoos, fashionable tattoos. So I was thinking, wow, the stigma is slow to change, but maybe when it changes, that'll make a difference.
Yeah, I know people in Japan. I used to surf. I know people who, and it's the same thing. It's people who accept the social pressure to conform and not have tattoos and say no to drugs, which is amazing because it actually seems to work in Japan. And the people who sort of make their own sort of judgments, and take the risk. And yeah, there is an increasing number of people who, 30, 40 years ago, the idea of fashion tattoos was probably unthinkable in Japan, but now there's a pretty high percentage of people that do it, and I suspect you'll find similar attitudes around drugs. But of course, because people are so aware of the very strong and prevailing negative attitudes, they'll be very careful about sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have a topic you wanted to do? I've got a few here. Are you fine with my choices?
Please, yeah.
I really like this article that the Japan Times covered. Some of the things that their writers would like to see in terms of food culture. And one of them, of course, was getting rid of single-use plastic. Now, single-use plastic is a lot huger of an issue maybe in Japan than other countries. I just don't think it's, I mean, I was really glad to see that they started charging for plastic bags. That made a big difference. Doing beach cleanups every month, we see a lot less bags, but we still see so much packaging, so much plastic bottles. It's you can't buy anything without plastic. It's just so daunting, right?
Yeah. And, I think the problem, as I understand it, is that while there's increasing awareness of plastics being, relying on petroleum and being terrible for the environment and all that sort of thing, at the same time, people are so used, they associate plastic packaging with sanitation. And so the idea of when you're having sweets, which are like chocolates, which are all loose in a box and not individually wrapped, they think, I'm going to get it all over my fingers, which if you don't have them individually wrapped, as is the norm in America or New Zealand or whatever, we don't care. But Japanese people, once they perceive it as being dirty or messy or something like that, it's sort of like, well, you have this turnaround now that people are saying, okay, we should get rid of plastics, but they still want to have individually wrapped chocolates, inside of a bag, which is still ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, especially during COVID, you have to be more careful. Everybody's worried about germs. But like I've been to cafes and I'd be having this beautiful coffee, tea, cake, and cookie set, and absolutely everything is in a reusable bowl or a cup. It's beautiful. And they'll still give me the plastic spoon or the plastic straw or the plastic oshibori or something, right? And I'll be like, but why not reusable for this? Because as a consultant, I often talk to businesses about it.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, because of COVID. I was like, but you're reusing the cup, you're reusing the bowl. Like, why? It's kind of like people are just thinking of one part, but not the bigger picture. I don't know.
But this is the thing, and it's affected me. It's to me again, it's a little bit similar to. It's funny how easy it is to trigger people on. I found an interesting map on Twitter of Europe with countries where it is generally practiced that people wear shoes inside, and countries where they don't. And I just sort of made a joke because it's one of these things that I grew up wearing shoes inside and not caring. But once you adopt the habit of taking shoes off and associating shoes in the house as being unhygienic, you can't unsee it. Like once you see the germs, you can't unsee them.
Did you sit on your bed with your shoes on? That always freaks me out when I see that on TV because I grew up in Hawaii. We always take our shoes off too.
Yeah. I mean, and I lived in rural New Zealand, so of course sometimes you'd actually wear gumboots covered in mud, and you'd take those off at the door. But if you were in sneakers, of course you'd wear them inside. There was no place to put the shoes except outside, and that was for work boots.
Wow.
So, but this is the thing, and I never thought anything of it but once you see that as dirty, then you can't unsee it as dirty. Wow, right? And this is the thing. I think it's those the mentality that everything has to be individually wrapped and you need a plastic spoon for everything. You're trying to convince people to unsee germs that they see. I think that's the challenge.
But they don't see it on the bowls. They don't see it on the cups that they're reusing, but they see it only on the spoon.
Yeah.
I mean,
so they don't see the germs on the bowl, but they see the germs on the spoon, and it's not rational. But remember, they're seeing germs, and you can't see germs. So this is the problem. It's the perception and reversing the perception.
Has a good point. I always associated individual packaged edibles with the omiyage culture. Not sure how COVID influenced this mentality. I think that's true. I always thought of it as omiyage culture as well. But definitely with more takeout during COVID, it has more plastic. We've seen more plastic, right?
Yeah, it's always been that you're right. I used to work in a souvenir shop in New Zealand, and Japanese always want little individually wrapped so they can give it out to individual people, like a present for each person. But the problem is that then you end up with Oreos where Oreo packs, where every Oreo is individually wrapped, and when Japanese see an Oreo pack without them individually wrapped, they think, oh, I'm going to get my hands dirty. It's like that. So you're right. Maybe it started out with the omiyage thing and it took over, but to me, it's this germ thing. And yeah, it's funny. It's interesting to see this. People are becoming so aware now. There's so much government push on this, and they're talking about charging for the plastic spoons next, which I saw people freaking out on the internet.
You know what I really want to see charged is in the supermarket, you have the bags that people wrap around all the already packaged things. They put another plastic bag around it. That one,
Yeah.
that one's still free. And we see a lot more of that now on the cleanups than we did before, because people are starting to use that instead of the plastic bag, which they now have to pay for. So I would like to see even a 1 yen charge for that. I think would make a difference and make people stop using it so much.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard when people think they're doing it for hygienic reasons. Like when they're doing it with veggies and they use the little pull-down bag. Even for me, I would find that hard because I've been living here for too long. But you're right. You just have to trigger the thought at least first, right? And I think that's what the purpose. No one cares about 1 yen.
I had a big shock. I tried something the other day. 7-Eleven is advertising they're using bioplastics on their rice balls. And I saw a press release about that months ago. I was really excited. So when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is great. I bought it. I took it home. I put it in my garden. I put it in water. I put it in direct sunlight. I put it in shade. None of it was at all changed after a month. It's exactly like normal plastic. So I don't know how they get away with calling it a better solution.
Is it supposed to decompose, or is it just that it's made from biological products, but it's actually quite durable?
I put it on Instagram, and some people who are working in the packaging industry said it's very murky. It's a little bit, it's called greenwashing, right? The company is looking good because they're using, I think it was 30% plant-derived source with the plastic, and it's highly processed. So it's basically, it works like plastic, but I was under the impression it was biodegradable. Which would have been better, right?
I'll mention something you probably appreciate. I was at the supermarket the other day and I saw some American French potato chips that I'd never seen before, but they were salt and vinegar flavored, and I love that, and they're really hard to find in Japan. So I thought, oh, I'll get a bag, and it was a brand. It was called the entire thing was bright yellow and covered in nothing but environmental claims: gluten-free, GMO-free. It was actually called, I'm trying to remember the name of the brand, but it was literally safe food was literally the brand name, and it was covered in all of these, like a race car covered in these sustainability claims. And then you flip it around on the back, and it said down the bottom below the barcode, not for sale in California. And I was like, why? I became curious, this whole thing. I mean, I just want the salt and vinegar. I don't really even care, but it's got all these claims, and then down the bottom, huge letters, not for sale in California. So I Googled it. Why is this not for sale in California? And it said, oh, because all these chip making companies put acrylamide, a known cancerous chemical, into or they use it in the boiling process. And when I opened the bag, it smelled like marker pen a little bit. And because I'd Googled it and I'd seen that this has acrylamide, I did try one. But then I was like, you know what? I'm totally put off now. But it was just so funny because it was almost like a cartoon, how it was just covered in this greenwashing stuff. And I don't even care. Honestly, I don't need to see it's GMO free to buy a pack of chips. But they go to all that effort. It's almost like the harder they try, the more they're trying to hide something. the greenwashing is ridiculous, isn't it?
That's crazy. And then, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to start my own consulting firm and help the small guys who are actually doing sustainable business, but they're not getting any credit and they're not branding themselves that way. And then the big guys are using all the branding, but they're not actually doing it. So I wanted to help the small guys. That was my aim.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. That's right. So many big companies exploit those claims. I actually watched Super Size Me 2 on Amazon the other week, and it was specifically about the claims relating to what a free range chicken is. Apparently, you only have to have like a ridiculous, like a 1 tatami mat of space in front of the pan, and
it's not really natural as you imagine.
And so exactly, they sort of the whole documentary was actually about how greenwashing happens and how it was possible to put all of these claims. They tried to qualify for every claim, like with the bare minimum on like a chicken farm. And yeah, it was as you would expect.
Yeah,
Um,
crazy.
so
Like
yeah,
even, I mean, the whole word greenwashing, it actually works just to make your package green and
yeah,
not make any claims at all. Like even if you have a normal product but you change your packaging to green, people buy it more thinking it's more sustainable. Isn't that crazy?
yeah. It's sort of like we have to educate ourselves all over again as consumers.
Yeah.
You
Well, you
know,
just
we
have to
did, and
be
then
discerning, a discerning customer,
yeah.
right?
And Japan is a long way behind all of that. But the thing about Japan that's wonderful is that there is actually so much wonderful, fresh, locally grown, great vegetables, fruit, and everything. That's one of the best things about Japan is, you know, it's a small country, so it's easy to distribute and get fresh food in Japan. And there was all this wonderful stuff. So you don't have to, you know, I actually eat so much less processed food here, I think, than I would be eating if I was back in New Zealand or Australia or living in America. So it is wonderful. So, you know, but at the same time, it's kind of ruined a bit when they go and put it in 10 plastic bags to sell an apple that was picked yesterday.
I mean,
So,
that's 100% true, right? And
mm,
if I compare the kind of snacks I could get in 7-Eleven America
mm,
compared to getting rice balls and edamame and healthy things at a convenience store here, even though you have the plastic problem, it is a
yeah,
culture more kind of focused on healthier eating. You can eat healthier here. It
yeah,
is easier.
yeah. It's funny, everything's just a little bit off, isn't it? And the environment, definitely the packaging thing, that's definitely culture. It's definitely just worried about sanitariness and seeing germs. And it's how do you counter that? How do you give that assurance
Yeah. Now,
and offset the damage? So, yeah.
next big topic, of course, we have to talk about is the gender gap. What a nightmare. Since the last time we talked, there's been so many gender issues that came up because of the Morty fiasco.
Ugh, I mean, to say that that in itself is a gender. It's not so much that that was a gender problem, so much as it just highlights, you know, how far Japan. I mean, the fact that in the Davos World Economic Forum, we're measured across all these political participation, economic participation. After all of that, that a country like Japan can come 9 places behind Saudi Arabia for gender equality.
It's so depressing. And it's so related to the problem that a lot of women are having now during coronavirus, being let go from their jobs.
Hmm.
A lot of, what is it, more than 50% of women working in Japan are working part-time. And what they mean by part-time is insecure contract system.
Yeah,
It's
working
not
on contracts.
part-time in terms of hours. It's
Yeah.
just a very insecure job position, right?
Yeah, the when Japan let go of the permit the lifetime employment system in 2002, and they kind of fibbed. The guy who designed it admitted that he was fibbing when he said he intended to have 10% of the workforce flexible, so that companies wouldn't be, you know, crushed under the weight of, you know, being unable to cut back when they were doing badly. But he later admitted his intention is for most people in Japan to be working on these contract systems. But even back before that, the situation always was when I worked in Japanese companies, most of the career, you know, salespeople and the career workers were men wearing suits, and the women would wear corporate uniforms, and they would be on contracts, and they would be the assistants all over the office. And it was this idea that they would work until they get married or until they get pregnant, or, you know, and then they might come back, you know, when the kids have left high school as 40-year-olds. So you'd have these basically 20 to 25-year-old and, you know, 45 plus women all wearing these uniforms going around. And it was, that's the way that even the traditional thing was structured. So of course, when you have those people on more vulnerable contracts and you're not promoting women as equal workers, that, yeah, those are the positions that are easiest to let go when companies are under stress. And so it just shows up how I think the economic shift, it does take a long time to correct that, right? You can't just snap your fingers and suddenly, I mean, you could argue that you could, but realistically, right, you can't just
Yeah.
put someone in a position that they're not built up for. You need to invest and train and hire, and you need to hire them with the expectation they're going to have careers from the beginning, and that takes a long time.
Yeah.
But what drives me crazy is the economic thing. I admit is hard. I can see the difficulty of that, and I can see efforts being made. The Keidanren is promoting more women executives, and they realize that to get a woman executive, they've got to be starting 20 years before that, right? So it takes a long time to get that pull out there, and, you know, they're starting to make that effort. But politics, it drives me crazy that the parliament in Japan has something like 10% women, when under the electoral system in Japan, you don't vote for every representative. Most of the people in parliament, you just vote for the party, and the party just makes a list of whoever they like that they decide to fill the seats. So parties can decide in Japan, like they do in Sweden and Norway and countries like that, that when you have a proportional representation system and you vote for parties and you have party lists, you can have actually a rule. Political parties in New Zealand and Scandinavia have rules that 50% of the women and maybe even more than that in the top names on the list can be women, and that's just the government can decide any time to increase the
Yeah.
number of women in parliament, and yet it's less than
And
10%.
I was talking to some Swedish people about that because I've always been interested in that. I did a semester abroad in Norway, and
Oh,
that was one of the issues we talked about a lot about social equity.
mm,
And this is way back in the 80s, right? And they
yeah,
were so far ahead even of America at that time.
yeah,
And they were saying it's really hard to have a quota of 50%. And of course, everybody complains you're not going to find people qualified enough. But when you make the decision that you're going to follow that quota, you find them. They're
yeah.
there. You just have to set a target and actually stick to it. And I really think if Japan set a target, they would find qualified women to fill the quota, right?
That's what most countries do, and no, I mean Scandinavia they went 50%. They went all the way right away. Most countries just set 30%, but even 30% would be huge in Japan. And that's right. It's that idea that you start to create an expectation that people start to become interested because they see it's something possible, and you just develop a pool of qualified people, who build that experience. And yeah, it needs a bit of a kickstart in Japan.
Yeah.
But the fact that the government, has been flying a flag of promoting equality as one of its it's one of Abe's main pillars, and he was the longest serving prime minister. And yet, after 8 years of that, Japan ranks 9 places behind Saudi Arabia. You have to ask, was he really serious, or was it a slogan? Because there are things. I admit there are
And
hard things, but there are easy
that
things
whole
too.
Tokyo University entrance exam fiasco, that
Oh yeah,
happened under Abe, didn't it?
yeah.
And
I mean,
so they had more qualified women than their low limit that they set, and still they didn't let in that limit. They wanted to accept
yeah.
more inferior candidates who happened to be men. I mean,
Well,
it's
that
just
was actually so that was I mean, that was ridiculous. That was a private university. So that was and that was historic. So on the one hand, it's hard you can't say that specifically was Abe, but certainly it shows a problem throughout the society. What happened was that Tokyo Medical University was actually rigging the scores of the entrance exam results against women. If for women candidates, they would actually mark them down 15% because they found that if too many women got in, they presumed that they would
Well, they
uh,
said they were getting pressured from the hospitals
yeah,
who had the impression, whether it was true or not, they had the idea that they didn't want to hire women because women would quit to take care of their kids or get
right,
pregnant.
right.
I mean, this is happening
But
all
the
over
result
the
was
world, but the
it
fact
was
that
the
they got
opposite of
away with it.
but it was like inverse affirmative action. They actually started secretly marking down women to try to reduce the number of women qualifying for medical school when they were qualifying. I mean, over a long period of time. Outrageous. And this is where the Maury thing, it's not so much what Maury said was outrageous, but it was just the fact that he even thought it was okay to say. You
Yeah.
can't control what people think, but the fact that,
Oh, no. The fact that it was kind of like, well, that's just Japan. That's just the way people are.
yeah,
But when you're head of an international Olympic committee, you are the face of Japan. You are Japan's brand. So why would they have put someone in power who's like that? But he's very connected. And the same thing for the Tokyo University scandal for the medical students.
yeah,
They found out that scandal was broken. They knew who the women were who were discriminated against. And the women said they wanted compensation or they wanted to be entered. And then, even then, the
mm,
university denied them entry.
yeah,
So it's like, even after the information is clear, there's no recourse,
yeah.
there's no penalty, which is part of the problem, right?
Absolutely. And what it shows is that yes, while people might claim that Japan really is sincere that it does want to improve on this and it set all these goals and it's the Keidanren's in on it and Abe is declaring that he's in it, that he's all for it. In the end of the day, if the leadership, if the people in power to affect the changes are really not bought into it, then the very hard work behind actually achieving the equality is never going to come around, and it means that the rhetoric is empty. And what that university case and what Mori shows is that the leadership in Japan, it makes the words look empty, and that's why Japan is ranked behind Saudi Arabia, because it's not able to back up its good intentions. It makes people question whether it has good intentions. Which is a shame, right? Because Japan has a declining population, they have labor shortages. So Abe correctly stated the logic that without increasing participation in women, that actually the whole economy is going to sink. And yet, it's people like Mori saying stupid comments like he did are exactly why that problem. And it's actually it's to solve a problem. It's not just trying to be virtuous for the sake of it. It's actually trying to fix a problem for Japan, and they don't seem capable of doing it, but they get reelected. So it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of a connected topic, which I'd love to talk about. It's a big issue in Japan right now, is about immigration and migrants, and how Japan is trying right now to put through a more difficult policy to make it more difficult for migrants to appeal for asylum.
This is for refugees, right?
Refugees, yeah.
Yeah.
So they just are going through government right now trying to make it more difficult. You used to be able to apply for asylum as many times as you like, and now they're making it illegal to apply more than 2 times. So if you apply more than 2 times, you refuse to be deported back to your country, maybe because of climate change, that your country is underwater, which is happening around the world, maybe because of war, which is happening, right? And your life is in danger to go back to your country. And if you are refused 2 times, you have to be deported or go to jail, is what the law is becoming. Right. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, immigration is always tricky. So overall immigration, Japan has vastly expanded immigration in the last 20 years, and the number of foreigners in Japan has gone up like 4 times in the time that I've been here. So on the one hand, it is promoting certain types of immigration for work and, for getting low paid workers and so on, working on farms and so on. But specifically, Japan has always been really resistant to accepting refugees. And this is the thing. I actually did a video. If you look on my channel, I did a couple of videos with the Japan Association of Refugees talking about this. It's fascinating.
Jane Best, I've interviewed her too.
I think it's Miyuki was who I was talking to. She's one of the sort of leaders of it here in Tokyo. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I asked her, so why would a refugee even come to Japan? And she sort of explained that, well, a lot of refugees, but when you're getting out of a war zone or whatever, when you're running for an airport, people just get on the first plane, and they normally have enough information, and they expect, for most countries in the world, when you get out of the war zone or the country that you are fleeing from, as soon as you arrive in a safe country, you then go and register with the UN HCR as a refugee, and then you can apply to either settle there or move on to another country. So there's actually a globally treaty-based agreed procedure, right, for doing this. So people are not looking to necessarily, be refugees in Japan. They're just looking to get out of the war zones or the places where they do not feel safe or whatever where they are, and they end up here and they apply here. But what happens in Japan is Japan just has this thing where the country where they land gets to determine if they meet the UN refugee criteria or not. And Japan just doesn't recognize anybody. There are people coming here from Syria. There are Kurds from Turkey, people in unequivocal war zone situations with perfectly plausible cases that would be accepted in any other developed country, and they're being rejected in Japan.
It's crazy. I mean, to compare a similar GDP country is Germany to Japan, and Germany took 53% of the refugees who applied for asylum, and Japan took 0.4%.
Yeah.
Only 20 to 30 people per year are accepted in Japan.
Yeah. And look, there's different factors. With Europe, of course, there's colonial legacy and a feeling of responsibility to be more open and so on as well. There are things like that that partly contribute to that openness that Japan doesn't have so much. But I mean, at the same time, statistics just say if you're rejecting 99 point whatever percent of applications, you must be rejecting some legitimate refugees. And look, everybody knows that there are, there's no dispute, even the 53%. So there's a high percentage of people who are, of course, economic migrants who are just want to, live in better countries for their families, right? They want to escape countries in poverty or whatever. And so and sometimes, I was told, normally the hearing process in Japan takes 3 years, and you're allowed to work during that process. So sometimes people do deliberately game the system for sure. But the whole idea of the system is to make sure that the legitimate people are taken care of. And the whole reason you have a refugee framework is you never know when your own citizens are going to need it. You look after other people because
Exactly. Yeah.
it's just being a good neighborhood community member.
Also, if you look at the social problems that we're having in Japan with an aging society, lack of laborers, if you search for any jobs in Japan right now, you know what most of the jobs you'll see is care. You need people working in nursing care with the elderly. That is a huge drain where we just do not have enough workers to take care of the elderly population here. And so in so many ways, and then look at the farms, there's not enough people to do the farming and the agriculture, and the schools are empty because there's
Yeah.
not enough kids. So if you did have a system which was sane and which would take legitimate cases and take the time but accept a higher number, which the United Nations and all the countries are pushing Japan to do, it would actually be better for Japan, right?
My,
In terms of
yeah.
population and growth.
I mean, look, the population and the work thing and everything, I think you should separate from the refugee issue. Japan, can and does have immigration approaches to allow farm workers and so on, and they've dramatically increased those. To me, the thing about refugees, you should separate it. It's not about it's not even, it should have nothing to do with Japan's interest. It should have nothing to do with whether Japan needs more workers. It's about morality.
Yeah.
It's about whether, do you save someone who's running for their lives or not? Yeah. It's just being a good citizen and figuring out, well, what's in it for me? That's just wrong. And the fact that Japan is,
I think it is good to think about it from both sides, because there are people who only think of, well, what good is it going to be for Japan to allow them in? There are people who think about that, right?
But Japan signed up to the Refugee Convention, where it agreed that, with all the other countries that signed up, that if people who are legitimate refugees come to my country, we're going to recognize them as refugees and take care of it. And my concern, my objection to all of this is that Japan is not meeting its international obligations by turning away legitimate refugees in need for whatever purpose of convenient. It's actually breaking its promise to the United Nations that it would actually treat those people legitimately like other countries that signed up. It's breaking its promise, and it's being called out for that. And the other thing is that when it tries to kick these people out and say, hey, Kurdish people, go back to Turkey, and they say, I'm not going back, I'll get killed if I go back, they put them into indefinite detention. And the UN called them out for this week. They said that Japan has constructive arbitrary detention without end, because if they don't get the cooperation to leave, they just stay in jail forever without any judicial recourse. And the UN said, you're not only failing your refugee obligations, but you have a system for imprisoning people without proper due process indefinitely, and that's actually also against Japan's international obligations. And Japan is acting with outrage. And part of the reason they're amending the immigration law is, okay, we're going to have reasons to put them in jail now. We're going to amend the law to add legitimacy to the mistreatment that we're giving them. And again, they're being called out rightly on that. It's to me, it's simple morality. It's not economics or self-interest. So yeah. And by the way, I say this: I am the grandchild of a refugee. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't acceptance of refugees. So
all Americans, unless you're Native American, you're a child of an immigrant, right?
Yeah.
It's America was created by immigrants.
Yeah.
That's most of the population. Nobody is from there.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a big issue, but I thought that was really timely and important to talk about, because it's going through the government, this new, more stringent regulation right now.
It's attempting to add formality and procedure to the injustice and rejection of people running for their lives right now. They're trying to formalize it, so they're worsening the situation in a way. They're fixing it in the wrong direction. So yeah, they deserve to be called out.
Yeah, I found this one quote. This is a great article by the Foreign Press that I have up here on the screen about the issue. And one of the quotes from it is, public support for political issues in Japan can be hard to achieve, especially on immigration.
Yeah, but you know what? So Japan has increased the number of immigrants in Japan by 4 times. There's like nearly 2.5 million. There were no Vietnamese people just about in Japan. They didn't even register like 10 years ago, and now they're the second largest group, more than Koreans. So one thing I actually like about the way that Japan has handled immigration is that it's not been political. It's never come up in an election debate. Sure, I think if they did politicize it like every other country, people are going to say, oh, I don't want strange people from other countries coming to this place. And that's the mistake. So many countries make it political. In Japan, it's purely administrative. The Ministry of Justice just decides how many workers we need and they let us in. And,
What,
and
what,
immigration has been so deregulated since I've been
what
here.
what is the benefit? Why are they pushing through and making it more stringent? I don't understand what the incentive is.
So Japan is being really liberal on immigration. They have dramatically opened the floodgates on immigration, and it's barely been politically controversial. Only extreme, fringe parties have even raised it as an issue. But they are extremely conservative and anti on refugees. And refugees are only like 20 people per year, out of 20,000 applications.
That's crazy.
But when you think that there's 2.5 million foreigners in Japan, so really refugees and immigration are totally separate. Japan is not politicized immigration very much, and immigration is actually open. It's easier than ever.
I think they were talking to immigration lawyers and refugee advocates in the same article. So I think it got
because it's under the immigration law, but the treatment of refugees is like a paragraph under the immigration law. Most immigrants in Japan, it's easier to come to Japan and get a 5-year visa than it ever was. For most people that want to come here, particularly if you're from a rich country and you want to live in Japan and you have skills and whatever, it's easy to get a visa. But if you're a refugee running for your life, for some reason, Japan makes it super hard. They do not want people running for their lives coming to Japan. They only want immigrants. And to me, the refugee thing is a moral duty. And immigration lawyers, they know the refugee provisions of the Immigration Act, which are just a really tiny part of it, but it's just completely immoral the way that the government's doing it, and it's rightly being called out on it. Japan is actually not. It's become very, very open to immigrants. The foreign population has exploded in Japan, so it's not an anti-foreigner thing. I think it's this thing that we don't know where refugees come from, or if they're legit, or if they're just scamsters running away for economic reasons and pretending to be refugees. And so they're just rejecting everybody. And again, I think it's that emergency situation. That's the weird part. And for some reason, Japan is actually more and more open to immigration, but they don't want refugees, and it doesn't make sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I really appreciate your point of view. That was a really interesting interview that you did. I did watch that on your channel.
Yeah.
I would encourage anybody who hasn't seen that to watch that. That was a great interview. Should we leave on a positive note? Have you noticed any positive things? You mentioned battery technology.
Yeah. Although, honestly, I'm not sure how well I could riff on it, other than it's just cool that it is just, at the moment, like Toyota has the most battery patents of any company, even though they're hardly using them, but they say that they will. GM has a bunch of cool. They've figured out how to make batteries better than Tesla. They say, ones that are more space efficient and charge faster. So, and that can be used for grid storage.
Come up in our conversations before is about the problems with the grid. And how if battery technology improves and batteries can be used in neighborhoods and residentials more, it takes a lot of pressure off of the grids, which are aging and have loads of problems, especially handling renewables. So, yeah.
Right. It's the intermittency, right? It's that, you need to match the amount of electricity in the grid with the amount that people are using. And the problem is that you can't guarantee when there's going to be clouds and when there's going to be wind. But if you just have it all charging huge batteries and storing it all up, and then you just draw from the batteries whatever you need, you can do that instantly, and it allows you to plug in. Whereas if you have it going straight into the grid, it's funny, to actually install wind power, you actually have to have a diesel generator attached to it to offset the intermittency, to start and stop for where it ramps up and ramps down, to compensate for the instability caused. You can't actually install. Well, sorry, I'm talking 2006, but so maybe this isn't. But this is why.
I think they fixed that. I would hope so.
Well,
but
this is what batteries.
Something that recently happened. In Japan they changed the electrical sourcing rules, so you can buy your electricity from anywhere, no matter where you are.
Right, they did, right.
Yeah. So last year I chose 100% renewable source. They had loads of wind farms and solar farms and everything. Everything was going great. My bills, we have solar panels on the roof as well.
Yeah.
I was feeling great about it. So if I have to buy anything from the grid, at least my local utility, they have to buy it from renewable sources. I was so happy. And
Yeah.
then February,
Mm.
we had an insane cold snap. Do you remember
Right.
that in
Yep.
Japan?
Yep.
And the electric companies around Japan actually increased production of fossil fuel energy,
Mm.
but you can't increase production of renewable
Right.
energy. So anybody like us who was buying 100% renewable when we needed it had 5 times higher electric
Ah.
bills,
Yeah.
which was a real shock. And I noticed, I mean, I don't know about renewables, but something similar happened in Texas, right? Because
Yeah. So,
it's a
and they tried to blame renewables
great
for it in
electric
Texas, but
system,
it
right?
was the same. Actually, Texas is like Japan. It's a small, isolated grid that's completely deregulated, and yeah, it just couldn't handle everybody turning on their heaters at once.
That was a
Um,
shock. So it really made me think I need to invest in a home battery to
yep.
store my solar power for when we need it at night. And you know,
Well,
those kind of, I hope that doesn't happen again. That
storage,
would bankrupt us.
home storage, and big storage is the key for increasing renewables. The problem is you can't install more wind than the grid can stabilize unless you have that surplus being stored somewhere, because you can't have that running into the grid, because that can cause outages. So yeah, if you have big batteries or big hydro pumps, you just have wells with mechanical pumps on them. You can do all sorts of things to actually store that surplus energy, and if you can store that and turn it on and off as you need it, then you can actually have more wind than you use. You can actually go and install. You don't have the limits on installation that you currently have,
Yeah.
and you can do that at both places. So
And
yeah,
I heard that there are some electric cars. I have a Tesla and you can't store from your solar panels. Unfortunately, you can't
some cars
store,
are now enabling that. I've heard as
can't
well. They're
feed
talking
it back
about
to
having
the house. So I can charge my car from the solar, but I can't charge the house from the car. But
Nissan is offering that.
is it Nissan? There's
Yeah.
some cars you can, right?
Yeah, and it makes total sense in Japan because we have all these earthquakes and natural disasters. So, and they announced right after a big natural disaster. I remember a few months ago that they were going to make sure that you're going to be able to use your cars, as charging stations. And actually, it's not just Nissan. I've seen a few American car makers as well. They've started to do this thing where yes, they've got plugs in the car where you can use your car as a generator. Like an electric battery, basically. So, yeah, people are cottoning on to that, and this is all the tech is so new, and I'm sure it'll become standard in no time. But yeah, it's wonderful to see the innovation and what it's going to be able, unlock.
Really exciting.
Yeah,
And there's so many more charging places, and I see gas stations going out of business around, which I always have a small cheer.
yeah,
I have a local gas station I used to use when I had a regular car, and now I only use it for the car wash every now and again.
oh yeah,
And I always talk to the guy, and I was like, "Do you guys have any plans to have like an electric charging area? Because
mm,
I don't want to see you guys lose your job. Like
yeah.
there's just not enough
Well,
demand."
that's right. And then the fact is, you have to charge when you charge. Charging takes time. So you can have what I understand is now that they have people who need to spend more time. Some people in America, they've discovered, oh, put a cafe in there and put a restaurant in there, and you can actually make money different ways. So there's actually opportunities opened up from the charging thing.
Definitely. I
But
would love
yeah,
to see gas stations turned into coffee shops, like electric charging and a hydrogen charging and a coffee shop. Wouldn't that be
yeah, yeah. Well, in
and
Australia and New Zealand, they're
a
basically, I'm sure it's the same in America. They're like supermarkets. You know.
well, ideally you would have local produce. Just use your own bag. Like I could design a great sustainable shop for any gas station. If you're going
Hey,
out of business, get in touch.
apart from the fact that it'd be slightly hilarious, you should totally open up a chain of gas stations. I could just sort of see you could actually do all of this, and it would be good.
Well, you might as well reuse the building. I have
Oh,
seen some of the buildings reused as other shops, to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah,
This is the idea. They're supposed to be in places where they're accessible to anyone, who has a car or whatever. So yeah, it's a total waste to just let them disappear. You can use them as convenience stores, as places to clean up your car, as places to do other things at once. So yeah, there's all sorts of opportunities. And like you say, if you could actually even combine local produce and renewable and friendly charging, yeah, why not?
have a repair shop That's something
Yes.
we often talk about, right?
Something Tesla needs more of.
We have so much great shade in
Yeah.
summertime, right? Like the gas stations are such high roofs
Yeah.
that it actually provides a lot of nice shade. So what a shame to knock that down. Like use it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the
Wait,
fact is as
Wyatt,
well, gas
thanks for
stations.
the super heart. That's very nice of you. Appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Oh, bye. Thank you. Yeah. The Yeah, and the fact that gas stations, because they're on those massive gasoline tanks, you're not allowed to actually build houses on them. The restoration is actually tough. So again, you want to figure out some way to keep using the land in a way that's useful, that's not storing petrol. But so
Yeah,
yeah, you don't want to.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, I think, that's a wonderful idea. I think you're onto something.
Farmers markets. I like it.
Yeah,
Well, that's our hour. Thank you so much, Hiko-san.
flies
That
by.
was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure always.
So fun. Thank you guys. So many great comments and questions today. I don't think we read out everybody's, but I gave you all hearts, whoever commented. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This is cool. I like this app. I'll have to look more into this. This is very cool that you can see all the comments and everything all in one place. This is cool.
It's really cool.
Hey,
Thank
kia ora, Louise. Oh,
you.
I know who you are. So you retweet Louise Poppy, right? She shows photos of Auckland sometimes, and I'm from Auckland. Oh, that's Auckland. Oh, kia ora. Good to see you.
She has beautiful tours that she does all the time, a lot on HAPS in Auckland. You should follow her.
Wow, I think I will. Thank you.
Yeah. And I hope to see more of you on HAPS as well.
Yeah. Well, I think I will. So I'm just subscribing right now. That's cool. Yes, this is very, very cool. So thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you here. Hopefully next month we can have another catch up.
Absolutely.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.